Greetings, ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to this review of the VK4502P Aufs B Tier 9 German heavy tank. There isn't really much to say about this historically that I haven't already said. You can go and catch my VKA video if you're more interested, but essentially the Porsche company, as well as designing a competitive design for the Tiger tank, so it was the Henschel Tiger that was taken on. Porsche also designed a Tiger, which was, if she's in the game as the Tiger P. We have the same thing when you get to the Tiger 2, i.e. the Tiger's replacement. The Henschel designed the Tiger 2, and the Porsche company designed the VK4502P Aufs A. Well, no, they designed the VK4502P, or the VK4502. The Porsche design is supposed to be, you know, an equivalent to the Tiger 2, basically, a Tiger replacement. They came up with two different designs. One had a forward-mounted turret, which in the game is at Tier 8, the VKA, and one had a rear-mounted turret, which in the game is at Tier 9, the VKB. Now, historically, apart from the turret placement, there was no difference between these two tanks. That was it. There's nothing else to be said. Here in the game, however, one is put in at Tier 8, and that's a fairly reasonable. It's put opposite the Tiger 2 in the tech tree. And the other one has been put up here at Tier 9, and it is massively overbuffed compared to the historical VK. Or the designed VK. And so Wargaming are interested in removing this tank and replacing it with something else. So they were going to introduce a patch or two ago I can't remember what it was called, but it was basically a mouse prototype that would then replace this tank. The problem is the mouse prototype was deemed to be universally terrible when it hit the test server, and so it didn't come about, and thus we still have the VKB at Tier 9 in the tech tree. So, in-game, what do we get with this thing? Well, 1950 hit points is pretty much par for the course for a Tier 9 heavy tank. Do I have some other Tier 9 heavy tanks to compare it with? Well, the only other one I have is the Conqueror. Bearing in mind I have a stock turret on this, so I've got 1850 hit points on the Conqueror. That'll go up to probably, what, 1900, 1950 with the fully upgraded turret. And if we compare that to the VK, yeah, it's about par for the course. It is, however, a very heavy machine, weighing, to all intents and purposes, 81 tons, and it has an 840 horsepower engine, giving this thing a power-to-weight ratio of only just over 10 horsepower per ton. It's so it's a bit of a weedy engine. This is not going to win any speed contests. Top speed of 30 kilometers an hour. Again, you're not going to win any speed contests with this. But the thing that really is frustrating is when you look at the traverse speeds, 20 degrees a second on the hull, 18 degrees a second on the turret. Now remember, of course, the real traverse speeds are a combination of these values here, the ground resistances, the engine power, all the rest of this good stuff. But the point is, this tank is slow to traverse. It does not turn well at all. Hull armor, 200, 100, 100, which may not sound, well, it might sound odd because it's the at Tier 7, the Tiger P had 200mm of frontal armor, and I think it was 80 side and 80 odd at the rear. But it means in practice the front of the hull on this tank, because of that sloping, is actually rather well protected. The sides are actually quite disappointing, but we'll come on to that more in a bit when I talk about the armor. The turret's pretty tough, 252 at the front, 160 at the side, 160 at the rear, but again I'm going to talk about that more when I move on to discuss the armor, because there are some problems with the turret armor. Talk about the gun in a moment. 400 meter view range, which is fairly standard for Tier 9 tanks, and a 710 meter signal range. Oh no, it's not 750 meters, whatever shall we do? No one cares. So, what about that thou gun? Well, you have a variety of different guns to choose on this tank. You will have to use, well, which ones you have to use depends very much upon how you do the grind on this tank. So, I'm going to go through them each in turn. If you are just coming at this straight from the VKA at Tier 8, then you are going to have a choice of two stock guns to use on this machine. you've got the KWK-43 L71 88mm gun. This is the gun that you were using down on the Tiger and the Tiger P at Tier 7, or the Jagdpanther. You know, 203mm of penetration, 240 alpha damage, good accuracy. Still not great aim time, and a blistering rate of fire. And you have the 105mm KWK L52, which is the top gun from the VKA. Compare the two guns. Basically, the 88 gets better accuracy, the 105 gets a faster aiming time and higher alpha damage. Essentially, the DPM values tend to be quite comparable. Now, both of these guns could be used on the VKA, although they were a bit low in penetration for that tank as a Tier 8 heavy, but because the VKA was a relatively mobile machine, they kind of worked. And on the VKA, you really wanted, in my opinion, to be using the 105. But they kind of worked on the VKA because of its decent mobility. On the VKB, however, it's a bit of a different story. If you're going to be using either of these stock tanks on this machine, you're probably going to be firing quite a lot of APCR and still getting frustrated at the result. In fact, if you're going to pick one of these guns to use as your stock gun, I'd probably recommend the 88, purely because you've got better accuracy and so a better chance of penetrating your target. And the ammunition's cheaper, so you can afford some shots to bounce and not get completely wrecked, and not have your economy completely wrecked. However, if you've played the Tiger II first, then you will have this gun. So I specifically ground down the other German heavy tank line, you know, the Tiger H, Tiger II, etc., specifically to unlock this gun so that I wouldn't have to use the stock guns on the VKB. Now, I appreciate not everyone's going to do that, but I did. And if you compare it to the other 105mm gun, well, basically you get a fractionally worse rate of fire, same aim time and all that jazz, but you get better accuracy and better penetration. So it really is a better gun to be using. So if you already have this 105mm gun unlocked, I would recommend using it. In fact, if you've got a bit of free XP lying around, and how much XP does the gun actually cost? It costs 46,000. If you've got 46,000 free XP lying around, I would probably recommend using it to get this gun to make your life tolerable. This gun is not fantastic on this tank, but it's good enough. It gets the job done. As long as you know your weak spots, you can make 225 pen and .34 accuracy work on this tank. But it's not the gun you really want to be using on this machine. The gun you really want to be using is this top 12.8cm KWK-44 L55 gun. This is the same gun that you get on the E75, it's the stock gun on the E100, it's the gun from the Maus. Tank destroyer versions of this gun are found on the Ferdinand, the Jagdpanther II, and as the stock gun on the Jagdtiger. You know, the list goes on. What is it you actually get when you use this gun? Well, it's a 128mm gun, so it's quite a hefty caliber weapon. 3.82 rate of fire, which is, however you look at it, absolutely terrible. 246 penetration, which for a Tier 9 heavy tank is about, you know, par for the course. It's perfectly fine. 490 alpha damage, which is what you really notice. The alpha damage on this gun is very tasty. 0.38 dispersion and a 2.9 second aim time. So it kind of feels a little bit like the Germans have imported a Soviet gun here, because it's not particularly accurate. The aim time isn't particularly good, but it does hit hard. In fact, 490, I believe, is the joint highest alpha damage on any Tier 9 heavy tank, tied with clearly the E75 because it uses the same gun, and the WZ-1111-4. That's a mouthful, and only beaten, I think, by the Japanese Type 4 heavy. I might be mistaken, but I think that's the only gun that beats it. So basically, it's alpha damage, terrible DPM, reasonable penetration, and okay enough accuracy as long as you're at close range. It's a heavy tank gun. It's a very heavy tank gun. It's a gun that gets the job done without being spectacular, essentially. So let's talk about the grind then. Here we go. Where are we? We are with the VKB up here. So if you're going to grind along this line, there's a couple of different ways of doing it. You can either initially go through the Panzer 35T or go through the Panzer II. if you go through the Panzer 35T, you then get the 38T, and then the 38NA, Panzer IV, VKP, Tiger P, etc. That is one option. The problem with taking this option is that you have the Panzer 38NA, which is not a particularly great Tier 4 light tank, and it does get scout matchmaking, so that can come as a bit of a culture shock. Your other option, and probably if we're going to be honest the more comfortable option, is to take the Panzer II into the Panzer IIIA, sidestep across into the Panzer IVA. This does of course mean you're going to be playing 2 Tier 3 tanks rather than 1, but they don't take too long to play. And then go up to the Panzer IV-D, and then you go into the Panzer IV-H and you get to the VKP, etc. So I would probably recommend going that way simply to avoid the Panzer 38NA. Anyway, you get to the VKP, which is not a particularly fantastic machine, but it does get an 88mm gun on a Tier 6 medium tank, which can make it interesting. Tiger P at Tier 7, since I played it, it's had a HD model, which has kind of battered the turret armour with the Nerf bat a bit. So again, it's not a particularly fantastic tank, but, you know, some people seem to like it. I need to rebuy it at some point. Then you get the VKA, which is an acquired taste. It's not a true heavy tank. Your armour is good enough to bounce lower tier tanks, but it does get relatively good mobility compared to your standard sort of heavy tank. Certainly better mobility than the Tiger II. And then you get to the VKB, which is an entirely different kettle of fish because it is basically a bunker. It's slow, it's ponderous, it's heavily armoured. So what's your stock grind going to look like? Well, your middle engine here you can have unlocked as low down as the VKP at Tier 6, and your top engine here you can have unlocked on the VKA at Tier 8. So you've already got the top engine. Hurrah. The top radio, if anyone cares, can be unlocked on a whole variety of different machines, including the VKP down at Tier 6, so you have the top radio unlocked. In terms of guns, well, even if you have the 12.8cm gun already unlocked, maybe you previously played the E75, you're not going to be able to mount it because you won't have this turret. And as I mentioned when I talked about the guns, you're not going to have this 105 L68 gun unlocked unless you've already played the Tiger II and unlocked the gun that way, or are willing to drop a load of free XP on it. So if you can, if it's not too much trouble, I would actually recommend playing the Tiger II before you play this, just to get hold of that 105mm gun to make the grind palatable. Once you've done that, well, how you proceed is really up to you. The stock turret, the armour on it, it's okay. It tends to be, if your opponent is half decent, they'll shoot you in the turret and probably penetrate. I mean, it's only got 220mm of frontal armour, which is not bad, but the angling is not good. So at Tier 9, you come across a lot of guns with, say, 240 plus pen, and they will go straight through the front of it. I mean, personally, I would probably recommend prioritising the suspension just to try and make the tank turn a little bit faster and move a bit faster. I found the 105mm gun from the Tiger II palatable until I'd got the turret and the top gun. I found it an acceptable gun to use. And so, providing that you haven't gone through previous tanks, this is one of those tanks that if you prepare properly, the grind is not particularly painful. If you do not prepare properly, the grind will be horrendous. If you have only gone through the previous tanks with their stock modules and you haven't properly upgraded them, then you're going to be completely stock and this tank is going to suck because the gun is going to be terrible, the armour is going to be okay, but you're basically a bunker. Your mobility is absolutely woeful. You do not want to be playing this with a 600 horsepower engine and the stock suspension. So I would recommend preparing for this. Fully upgrade all the previous tanks, and if you can, play the Tiger II first, and that will make this grind relatively painless. So, what about things like equipment, crew skills, and all of those bananas? Well, consumables. I've got your standard 3 consumables. Are there any others you might want to choose? I honestly wouldn't swap out. The only things I might do is change these out for the premium versions of the same equipment. I think you need a first aid kit, a repair kit, and a fire extinguisher on this tank. So, I would recommend taking those. You tend to find that your fuel tanks get set on fire from side shots, and ditto, your ammo rack gets taken out and your crew die. So, that would be my recommendation. Ammunition, it's a 12.8cm gun, so your HE rounds are actually not terrible. I mean, if you look at the average damage on these HE rounds, 630, so you can do a lot of damage with it. Of course, you have to offset that with the very long reload time on this gun, which can be frustrating. So be careful if you're going to switch shell type. But a few HE rounds are not a terrible idea. I wouldn't necessarily recommend taking 5, as I've done, but it can be quite amusing to shoot hull down ST1s in the turret and watch them take damage and back off as they don't know what's going on. APCR, your penetration goes up to 311. Again, I think the AP penetration on this gun is perfectly adequate 99% of the time. Yes, I'm making that statistic up, but the majority of the time. I think I maybe fired 2 rounds of APCR in this tank as I've been playing it so far. You know, but take a few of them. And of course your armor-piercing rounds, they're your mainstay, so I've got 26 of those. You could probably cut down on the HE and the APCR here for a bit more armor-piercing. Equipment. Okay, gun rammer, you want a gun rammer because the reload time on this gun sucks. Vertical stabilizer, you want a vertical stabilizer. Because this tank is so slow, you want to be on the move as much as you can just to try and keep up with the battle. And I've found that this is allergic to artillery, so I've got a super heavy spall liner. Problem is, if you look at this tank, if you have an artillery round arcing in from the front, because of the rear-mounted turret, instead of it hitting the turret front, as it would on a lot of tanks, so say for example you're in the Lerva, you have an artillery round arc in, hits your turret front's pretty strong, you take some damage but not a horrendous amount. Because of the rear-mounted turret on this, instead of arcing in and hitting the turret, it arcs down and hits your engine deck, which will make you very, very sad indeed. So, and just in general, I've found taking a super heavy spall liner to be a good idea, personally. I mean, your other options, you could take vents here, if you wanted to. Just to all-round improve the tank. You could take optics just to try and get a bit more view range out of it. You could take an enhanced gun laying drive, although I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I would say either take a super heavy spall liner or improved vents, maybe optics if you really feel like it, maybe toolbox if your repair crew is not very good. Speaking of the crew, this is my German heavy tank crew that have been moving up the line as we go, so they're working on their 3rd skill. What crew skills do I recommend? Well, as ever, Sixth Sense is your friend. You could take preventative maintenance. You do take some engine damage in this tank because the engine is mounted at the front. However, I don't think I've ever been set on fire by an engine hit. I think they've all been fuel tank hits, as far as I recall anyway. Repairs is clearly a good idea. Safe storage is a pretty good idea. The ammo rack appears to be in the side on this tank, or certainly the ammo rack can be damaged from side shots. And these sides are relatively easy to penetrate. So, yeah, safe storage is a pretty decent idea. So is... where is it? I don't think I've actually taken it. No, I haven't. But so would be... what's it called? Clutch braking, just to try and buff the traverse speed on this tank a little bit. But, I mean, basically your standard heavy tank crew skills. You're going to get shot a lot, so you want Sixth Sense, you want repairs. Brothers in Arms is nice, you know. Smooth ride, yes, standard sort of stuff. So, I think that's all that I wanted to say about this tank in the garage. Let's go and have a quick look at the module locations, armour scheme, all of that stuff. So let's have a quick look at the module locations on this tank then. From the front, you have got the driver in the front of the hull, which should come as no great surprise. And, you know, you've got... is that a... yeah, looks like another crew member sitting behind the machine gun port here. You also will get engine damage from frontal shots on this tank, because all of this is engine deck, lovely engine deck. So if someone can punch through the front of the hull, they will take out your engine, or they stand a good chance of taking out your engine. You also, of course, have ammo racks located here in kind of the rear section of the hull, here right at the back, and also in the rear of the turret. So the side of this tank has quite a lot of ammo rack going on that can get incredibly frustrating. From the rear, it's basically more engine and more, or transmission or whatever, and more ammo racks. Rear of the turret, rear of the hull, ammo rack central. Going to the other side, we've seen this before again, engine in the front half of the hull, rear half of the hull, and very rear of the turret, made of ammo racks. And then from above, well, there's nothing really to talk about here. Nothing particularly surprising. Basically, what I'm getting at is that your side profile is very big, very flat, very vulnerable, and very frustrating when you get shot in it. So how well protected is it? Maybe there is armor to stop those ammo racks detonating. Let's go and have a look at the armor scheme. So just before we actually talk about the armor I should probably mention the gun depression. The gun depression on this tank is 5 degrees, which is okay. But when you combine that 5 degrees with the fact that the turret is mounted at the rear, it's a big tank, it's a very awkward combination, and you really don't feel that 5 degrees. So, let's have a look at the armor scheme. Let's start with the front of the hull. The front of the hull is 200mm thick, but has got some decent angling on it, which means that a lot of the time the front of the hull is easily over 250mm of effective armor. Lower front plate is not a weak spot. In fact, it's because a lot of the time people are shooting slightly down on it, it's actually a stronger point of armor than the upper front plate. Lower front plate, you're looking at 300, 310, 320mm of penetration to punch through depending on the angle. Upper front plate, you're looking at 250, closer to 250. So, yeah, bear that in mind. Now, interestingly, the tanks.gg here, website I'm using, isn't showing all of the weak spots, because there is a weak spot over to this side, which is a driver's hatch, which is 170mm thick, so you can punch through this with the 122mm guns you find on, like, the IS, for example. There is also a weak spot over here that the colour scheme is not highlighting, but if I hover the mouse over it, you might be able to find about there. It's where that machine gun port is. It's a part of the armor that is 200mm thick like the rest of the front of the hull, but it doesn't have that sloping and angling going on that you can see on the upper front plate here. It's flat as a pancake, so you can shoot it straight through that machine gun. However, they're not the easiest weak spots on this tank. Let's talk about the front of the turret. Front of the turret is 250 odd millimeters thick, 252, with a little bit of angling, but nothing to get really too excited about, so you can punch through this with about 260mm of penetration, or 270. So basically tier 10 medium tanks should be able to punch, medium tanks, tank destroyers, some heavy tanks should be able to punch in the front of this turret, firing armor, piercing ammo, and firing APCR. Yeah, you can go through the front of this turret. The gun mountlet is ridiculous. It's not huge, but 519, 1,778mm of effective armor. Yeah. Don't shoot this thing in the gun mantlet. It's got one of these troll German gun mantlets. But the front of the turret is perfectly viable. These sloped parts of the turret, they're 160mm thick because it's side armor, but the angling means that this is going to bounce, so don't bother shooting it here. Turret roof. Now you may be going, oh, I remember the Tiger II and the VKA. Turret roof was 40mm thick. I could overmatch it with my 120mm gun. Yeah, it's 60mm thick now. You're not going to be overmatching this with anything. Well, no, that's a lie. Unless you're firing AP out of one of the tier 10 British tank destroyers, you ain't going through this. Not from the front. However, that's okay, because weak spot central up here. It's not good. So you have this commander's hatch, which is 130, 60, it's weak. And in front of that you have this vision port thing. And from experience, I know that this effectively functions as a big fat weak spot. So if you shoot it pretty much anywhere here, with most guns that can face this tank, you're probably going to penetrate it. This is the weak spot on the tank frontally that you want to be going for, and it will make you very sad if you're the driver of the VKP. So, what about the side armor? Well, the side armor is 160mm, and there's some angling, but the side of the turret is basically 175 effective. So, if you've got like a 90mm gun or a 122mm gun, you know, the sort of tier 7, 8 style guns, you don't want to shoot it in the side of the turret. Side of the hull, however, is 100mm thick. You can shoot it there all day long. In fact, we put some angling on this, that goes up to 131. Put some more angling on this, that goes up to 186. But 186 isn't actually very good at tier 9, if you think about it. I mean, tier 9 medium tanks, the lowest penetration on a tier 9 medium tank, with the top gun of course, is the T-54/Object 432 that has 200 with AP. I mean, in order to really get any bounces off this side armour, you need to be at an auto bounce angle. Anything less and you're just not going to bounce anything. So when you're facing people with this tank, put a little bit of angle on it by all means, but not very much, because you really do risk then taking shots into the side of your tank, and that will make you very sad indeed. The other thing to be aware of is people can quite happily shoot you in the front axle, and that will damage your hull. It's going on this side armour, so be careful of that. Rear of the tank, well, who really cares? It's like 100mm on the rear of the hull, it's 160 on the rear of the turret. I mean, you might struggle to penetrate this, I guess, with the 57mm gun on the MT25. And the gun on the 5916, and that's about it. Everyone else will just punch straight through the rear of this, and they won't care. In fact, very high caliber HE will punch straight through the rear of this. Some of the British Hesh rounds will giggle and punch straight through the rear of this. So what are we getting? Essentially, all of the armour on this tank is on the front, and even then, there are substantial weak spots. Also note, I should say, if you try side scraping or anything in this, the tracks are not very big, and so you cannot rely upon them to soak damage for you, like you could in something like an E75, KV4, or a whole host of other heavily armoured tanks. You have to really point the front of this tank at people to get bounces, and just hope that they're not firing premium ammo, especially that 330 pen heat ammo you find on an awful lot of tier 9 and 10 heavy and medium tanks. So that's the armour scheme. Let's just go and have a quick look at some gameplay, methinks. So here we go with the first replay. We're top tier, you know, as per standard. The first replay will be when we're top tier, the second replay will be when we're bottom tier. This is on Corellia. Both of these matches are actually going to be on... Is Corellia, isn't it? Yes, both of these games are actually going to be on Corellia. And this is an assault game, so we're going to try and duff over the enemy team. Now, usually, when I'm on this map, and when I'm assaulting, I try and conduct the assault on up in the other corner, the A0 corner, if you will. Personally, I find that a more comfortable place to work. I know that bit of the map better. I actually prefer attacking it. I also prefer defending it if I'm on the other team. The problem here, however, is that if I try and change flank, because the VKB is so slow, then I would just waste so much time getting over to the other side of the map that I'm not doing that. Instead, we're just going to try and drive down this side of the map instead, and you can see from me talking in chat that I'm kind of frustrated with this tank at the time of playing it. I'm sure I'll talk about this a bit more later on, but I don't really like this tank, in case you haven't already got that impression. And the T95 is also whinging that his tank isn't very fun. Haven't played it, don't know, but it's slow and ponderous, and I'm not holding out a huge amount of hope for it. Anyway, we've lost our light tank. In fact, we've lost both of our light tanks, or two of our light tanks already. That MT25 and the T54 lightweight. I was getting a bit of dodgy ping as I played this game. You just saw there a ping spike up to kind of 100 milliseconds. I'm sure there are some people watching this going, 100 milliseconds? That's glorious. I wish I got 100 milliseconds all the time. Yeah, but usually I get a lot better. So, going out here to try and shoot the bad guys without getting shot myself. We take a small hit from the E75, which lets us know he's using an 88mm gun, as it only did, 240 odd average damage. E75 gets himself set on fire, and we put a nice round into him there to keep him tracked and do him a ton of damage. Take a shot there, but it only damages our tracks, and you can see, provided we keep our front pointed toward the bad guys, we're capable of bouncing a lot of shots, and wow, that guy just got obliterated. Talk about unnecessary ammo racks. Oh, hey, look, our gun just got damaged. Now, Tiger 2's turret front is not particularly good, so trying to take a shot of it and trying not to hit the gun mantlet. The gun mantlet is about the only thing on that turret that I'm going to bounce on. And this is really the thing. With this tank, you want to keep the front pointed toward the bad guys, and you want to engage your targets preferably at sort of mid-ish range. You don't want to be engaging at very long range because this gun is just not up to it, and you don't want to be engaging at very short range because then you are very vulnerable to being flanked. And you can have a very sad day indeed. Now I get tracked here in a slightly awkward position. I'm showing people a bit more of my side armour than I would like, but nonetheless. Now I should actually be aiming for the turret roof here because 128mm gun will overmatch the turret roof on the Tiger II. So that was a mistake on my part, but our artillery means that it doesn't really matter. Both of the enemy artillery have been destroyed, by the way, already in this game, so I don't have to worry about that, which is excellent weight off my mind. And so the main people I have to worry about are the Jagdtiger and the AMX-30, clearly the tier 9s. I do also have to worry about the other guys, especially if they're firing premium ammunition, but the punchiest guns are the Jagdtigers and the AMX-30s. Assuming they're fully upgraded, of course. Jagdpanther 2 over there. Seeing if I can find a shot on this guy. And of course, you take a shot at range with a gun like this, and you just blow their tracks off. You're not allowed to do any actual damage. We just lost a couple more tanks, which is kind of sad. And it's now me and the T-95 over on this flank. The two slow-moving fortress tanks, basically. The other tanks that we have left alive on our team, well, we've got a T-28 prototype and a T-69 and a couple of artillery pieces. The assault on the A0 side of the map has completely failed, and the enemy are moving towards our artillery. Although someone, T-28 prototype, does manage to finish off that T-34, and we managed to take quite a lot of health off that Jagdpanther 2. And there you can see that 490 alpha damage is very nice to have. We even set him on fire and he burns in a very satisfying manner. And the T-95 is clearly using the 120mm gun as he manages to reload before we do and finish off the Jagdpanther 2. So, scoreline wise, it's even, but if you look at where the enemy light tanks are, there's a platoon of Walker Bulldogs who are going to absolutely wreck our artillery, and they're going to put the enemy team in the lead. Oh, they also took out the T-69, and there goes the other artillery. And even if one of them, we managed to kill one of those Bulldogs, the fact remains that those Bulldogs, so far between them, have accumulated 7 kills. They've done very well. Jagdtiger actually manages to miss me, which I was not expecting. Tried to shoot his upper front plate. I'm never going to penetrate his superstructure with this gun. And so you can see I'm actually loading a round of APCR here because I am basically faced with a hull down Jagdtiger, 250mm of superstructure armour, and that shot misses. And I am never really going to contest his frontal armour in that position. And I can't flank him. I'm in a VKB, for crying out loud. So if I want to do anything to him, I basically have to load APCR, which has 311mm of penetration. So these are still not guaranteed penetrations. You can see there that I wiggled the turret. There you can see, bounced off the upper front plate. You can see there I'm wiggling the turret to try and deny him shots at my weak points. There we go, successfully works that time. But the first time he manages to penetrate, we don't need APCR now, just good old-fashioned armor piercing will do the job. We've got an AMX 1375 behind us, which is not very good. But I'm locked in a very slow and ponderous duel with this Jagdtiger. There's a shot in from our T-95 ally giving us a hand. There we go, we put in another one, leaving this guy a one-shot for either myself or the T-95. Wiggling as much as I could, but that Jagdtiger knows where he's shooting, and against someone who knows where they're shooting, there's very little you can do when you're in this tank. We do, however, manage to finish him off. We managed to bounce enough shots in the interim that we were able to duff him over. So the T-95 is guarding my rear, and I'm conversely effectively guarding the T-95's rear. Carnarvon knows what he's doing, and if you just look at where these guys are shooting to penetrate me, someone put a shot straight through the front of my turret, and then you can see it's all into this vision device. It's that weak point that I pointed out earlier on. Trying to see if I can finish off the Bulldog. I was trying to keep my T-95 ally alive. but I couldn't, and here we go. I'm tracked. It's like a beached whale. I'm the last one left. There's 2 minutes 20 on this game remaining. There is no chance that I'm going to manage to win this game, so I just decide to charge down the Carnarvon in an effort to kill the guy, but as I said, he knows where he's shooting, and he kills me. And yeah, that was the game. You can see we were able to bounce a number of shots, that by wiggling our tank we were able to kind of increase the chances of bouncing, but that really against high penetration guns, and that Jagdtiger's gun has 270 penetration and he put a shot straight through the front of my turret. Against high penetration guns you have problems, and against people who know where they're shooting you have problems. You don't want to be fighting at very close range, because then your weak spots become easier to hit, and your flanks are very vulnerable, but you don't want to be fighting people at very long range, because then your gun just becomes generally pretty ineffective, as you saw against that Jagdpanther 2. So, yeah. Nonetheless, we were top tier, so let's go and have a look at how well we did, despite the fact that that game was a loss. So that game, despite being a defeat, was actually enough for first class mastery. We also picked up Fire for Effect, Cool-Handed, and High Caliber, which got us the Heroic Resistance, which got us the first class mastery. 4,488 damage done, 2 kills, 1,143 base experience. Well, that's probably actually experience once you include the High Caliber. So easily the most damage of anyone in the game. But kudos to the Walker Bulldog platoon on the enemy team. They managed 8 kills between them and had an instrumental role in winning that game for their team. 15 shots fired, 14 hits, only 9 penetrations though. For that damage count, most of which was at relatively close range, we received 24 hits, of which 17 didn't penetrate and 7 did, and bounced 4,375 damage with our armour. So the armour is certainly capable of bouncing shots when you have it pointed to the enemy, i.e. when you're front on, and yeah, but we came unstuck really when people knew where to shoot. Premium ammo can be a problem with this tank, but you don't need premium ammo to penetrate it from the front. You just need to know what you're doing and know where you're shooting, as the enemy Carnarvon and Jagdtiger did, and they just picked us apart. We still made a profit from that game because we were running a premium account, and actually if we'd been running a standard account we would have still made a profit despite the considerable ammunition and repair costs that were involved. It was actually 732 base experience plus 411 from Courageous Resistance gave us the 1143 total experience, and of course add on your premium account bonuses. So there was a game where we were top tier. Let's go and move on to the game where we're bottom tier. So here we are with the second game to show you, and as promised we are bottom tier. You may be getting a sense of deja vu here, but remember I did mention that both of these games were going to be on the Corellia map. They're both actually assault games. The previous game we were attacking, and in this game we are defending. So having a quick look at the enemy teams, what do we actually need to be worried about? Well, firstly, there are 3 artillery on the enemy team. The FV207, generally not considered a particularly amazing artillery, but the GWE100 has a very large gun, and the M53, M55 is a very, very dangerous artillery piece indeed. What else do we have to worry about? Well, clearly the tier 10s, so the IS-4 and the Object 430. But the M103, the Centurion, the tier 9 Waffle Thrower, they all have guns that are perfectly capable of contesting our armour with regular AP rounds. In particular, the Centurion and the Waffle. When you get down to the IS-3 and the T-32, those guys will struggle with our armour, and the T-54 Mod 1, even if they load premium ammo. The ISU-152 can contest our armour with AP, and the T-54 lightweight, and hopefully it goes without saying, the M6 would need our flanks to hurt us. Why there's an M6 platoon with an IS-3, I don't know. I mean, I get our platoon, Batchak 155-55 and an AMX 1390. Both of those tanks are match made as tier 9s, I totally get that. Why would you take an M6 with an IS-3? No idea. Anyway, you can see that I'm going to the side of the map that I mentioned in the previous game that I prefer to attack and defend from. I'm more comfortable up on this side rather than over on the side you saw me in the previous game. And you can see there's quite a few enemy tanks there. We need to be worried about the ISU-152 and the IS-4 and the M103. The T-54 Mod 1 and the M6 don't concern me anywhere near so much. But you can definitely see that this thing is slow and ponderous. I mean, we're struggling up the hill here. And what I have actually noticed is I have before tried to do this, been spotted out earlier on, and taken an artillery shell or two as I drove up here. I think if I remember correctly, on one occasion I took a penetrating HE round to the side armour that one-shot me before I had even managed to get into any sort of usable position. So there we go. Bit lucky there as we take a completely unaimed shot at the Centurion 7. That could very easily have bounced. Then again, since the HD model, his turret armour is not especially good. Bounce a heat round there from someone, just taking a shot at the Centurion's hull, and we take him out. I think it might have been the IS-4 who was firing heat, because the shot from the waffle sounded like it was good old-fashioned armour piercing. I was trying to see if I could finish off the Centurion, but he's not completely stupid. He's pulling back. He doesn't want any of that. And we put a shot through the lower front plate of the IS-4. And we're just going to keep rinsing and repeating this, trying not to expose either the side of our turret or the side of our hull to anyone, and trying to just give people our frontal armour and shoot them with this 12cm gun. IS-4's armour was a bit too thick there for us to penetrate, but we bounced the Centurion Mark 7 again. He is not having a particularly good game. Now, we have now lost our IS-3 and our 113, as well as our AMX and our Centurion. And I decide to change flanks and go and fight somewhere else. This T-54 Mod 1 appears to want to flank around. He's being engaged by a Tiger II, but we need to start killing these guys as quickly as we can, and with that shot we finish off the T-54 Mod 1. Would really like to take out that Tier 9 waffle thrower as well. Our artillery puts in an excellent shot to take out the ISU. Tigers put a shot into the waffle, and our T-28 prototype finishes him off. So, nicely done to our tank destroyers and artillery there. They were some nice shots to, score-wise, put us back into this game. Now, looking at the enemy team list, they only had 2 tank destroyers. Both of them are dead, so it's relatively unlikely that there's going to be anyone camping up on that sort of F7 hill, so moving around here is probably a relatively safe thing to do. There is, however, a cheeky Object 430 who puts a shot into the Tiger II. Now, there's the M6, M6 is still alive, and the IS-4 being engaged by our team from the other direction, so I decide, screw it, we're just going to try and... Well, I was thinking about trying to just chase down this Object 430, but I can see our Tiger II is taking shots here, so what I'm trying to do here is use my tank to cover the Tiger II and to bounce shots that would otherwise hit him. I'm trying to keep the Tiger II alive, basically. As it is, there aren't any other shots that come in, so my efforts were kind of in vain, but I gave it a go anyway, and hey look, enemy GW E100 fires, nails the Tiger II, who I was trying to protect. We put a round into him, not enough to kill him, but our artillery, our Batchat, manages to finish him off. And the scoreline is now 10-5, this is looking like it's going to be a fairly decent game. And has the 430 got himself stuck? You know, I do believe that he might have done. Oh, poor guy. He's wedged himself up here, and he's like a turtle in the sun on his back. I'm hammering him, our artillery's hammering him. He's not having a very good game at all. Poor sod. You can see in chat he appreciates the situation he's in. And while we're doing this, the enemy team has just collapsed. Yeah, it happens sometimes. You get yourself wedged somewhere, and you can't really free yourself. So, it's just the 2 artillery left. FV207 and the M5355. And with 490 alpha damage gun, I'm not even going to risk the vagaries of high explosive ammo. 490 alpha damage should be enough to one-shot either of these guys. So I'm just going to AP them. There's no real need to use the HE in this particular case. And for that reason, actually, considering you have quite high alpha damage, meaning that a number of the times, i.e. when you're facing artillery, you may not actually need to load HE, You may not want to take the 5 rounds that I've got. You could probably ditch that down to maybe 2 rounds of HE and you'd be fine. Anyway, pushing down here looking for their artillery. They're probably going to be up on the hill or to our left here at the back. The fact that I haven't been spotted indicates that they may well be up on the hill, and so far we haven't taken a single point of damage. FV207, T32 shoots him and I manage to finish him off. And that just leaves the M5355. But if he's at the top of this hill, then that means we need to climb up said hill, which is going to be rather a nuisance. Did I mention weedy engine? Tank, not really very fast. Well, I still, didn't get respotted, so I'm pretty sure the enemy artillery is going to be up on this hill, or... No, I was going to say has run away. Well, he clearly can't have run too far because we've got an E50M, T32 and a Batchat approaching from the other direction, and this guy actually gets artilleried and dies. So, there we go. We actually managed to get a win in the VKB on this map. Hurrah! Yeah, that was the game. Ended up being a fairly decent game in the end. So, let's go and have a look at the post-battle results. So here's the results of that game. First class mastery, spotter, and fire for effect. Ribbons, 3,489 damage, 2 kills, 1,082 base experience. And we got the highest damage count and the highest experience of anyone in the game, which was fairly nice. 9 shots fired, 9 hits, 8 pens for that damage count. We took 4 hits, of which none of them penetrated. There were 3 splashes, but we didn't actually lose a single hit point. The only damage we took was some module damage to our tracks. So we bounced 1,460 damage with our armour from those 4 shots. 1 enemy tank spotted, 6 damage, 2 destroyed, and picked up just shy of 1,600 assistance damage into the bargain, meaning that from that game we actually made a pretty healthy profit. Good amount of damage, most of our shots that we fired did damage. Assistance damage into the bargain, so with a premium account that was a 53,000 credit profit. Without, it would have been a 32,000 credit profit. But don't kid yourself, this is the anomaly. Generally speaking, when you're playing this or other tier 9 tanks, you can expect, if you're not running a premium account, to break even or even lose money. These are not very profitable machines to run. 1,082 base experience, and you can see there that with a premium account, that total with the double for the win as well went up to 3,246 experience. So yeah, the that was just showing that the armor and the gun work fairly well even in a tier 10 game. Of course, if someone actually gets a chance to shoot you in the weak points, as I mentioned earlier on, if they know what they're doing, or if they're just going to load premium ammunition and shoot you straight through the front, there's not much you can do. Anyway, let's go back and round things off in the garage. So what do I think of this tank overall? In my opinion, for my money, well, I don't like it. Why don't I like it? Oh, well. So let's look at what you get. You get a gun that's... the gun's good enough. The gun gets the job done. The gun's fine. It's the mobility versus armor trade-off that I don't like. So your mobility is pretty terrible. And all of your armor is focused on the front of this tank. That means that you can't realistically angle this tank or anything like that. You just have to point it at the target and hope. What's the problem with doing that? The frontal armor is very good. Well, yes, the frontal armor is very good. However, you suffer from people who know where they're shooting, who will either shoot you here, 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 or load a premium round and shoot you through the front of the turret. You suffer from people who have 330mm of heat penetration because they can auto-aim at you and just blitz straight through your tank and there's nothing you can do about it. You suffer against high-tier tank destroyers who have the penetration to punch through your machine. You suffer against artillery, who can just land giant globules of death on you. Basically, this tank does well at one end of a corridor when it's top tier and every other tank is tier 7. Maybe tier 8, but some of the tier 8 tank destroyers can be a problem. They're the situations under which this tank does well. You can make it work in other situations, but it lacks flexibility, and in a lot of cases, even if you manage to get yourself at the end of that corridor, you will get tank destroyed, you will get premium ammoed, and you will get artilleried to all hell. And it's very difficult to really criticise anyone for that, because this is a giant, slow slug of a tank, so of course artillery's going to shoot you, especially if it can get a shot through that engine deck, because they'll do a shed ton of damage. People are worried about this armour. This tank has gained a reputation for being very difficult to penetrate frontally, and so they will tend to just double tap 2 and shove premium ammo straight through your tank. At which point your armour is worthless. If you were to compare this tier for tier with, for example, a KV-4, KV-4 sacrifices a lot of mobility for a shed ton of armour, but it's all-round armour protection. So you can, let's just go to the KV-4 for a moment to show you what I mean. You can side scrape in this tank, for instance. You have tracks that will absorb shots. You know, heat ammo that's fired at this tank. There are some funky angles that it can bounce off of, and again, your tracks can absorb that. None of that is really an option in the VKB. Because the front, well, there's no angle, there's no curvature here or anything. Heat will just blitz straight through these flat, relatively flat surfaces. And your side armour isn't that thick, and your tracks are not very big, so you struggle to side scrape in this thing, and even if you do, people will shoot you in the turret, and this is a relatively large weak spot, as I discussed when looking at the armour scheme. And the turret, well, if people have kind of, well, basically if people load premium ammo, they can just punch straight through your turret, and trust me, people do, because this is the VKB. So, what am I getting at? I'm getting at this, the armour on this tank is, in my opinion, not worth the mobility that you trade away in order to get it. It's just not worth it. This tank is not flexible in the slightest, and you basically get yourself into a situation, you point the front of your tank at people, and you hope they don't know where you're shooting, you hope they don't get lucky with their shots, and you hope they don't load premium ammunition. And if they do any of the above, you're screwed. That's why I don't like this tank. Because its main strength, the armour, is so easily negated. And once someone has negated your armour, you basically just have a health pool, a gun, you know, and the gun is nothing special on a tier 9 heavy tank. The health pool is nothing special on a tier 9 heavy tank. So, yeah, I do not like this tank. Once I have unlocked the mouse, and I haven't yet, I've got another, what, 60-odd thousand XP to go. Once I have unlocked the mouse, this crew will move up to the mouse, the VKB will get sold, and I won't look back. I don't really like this tank, but you might. You know, maybe you like your slow, ponderous, heavily armoured tanks, and I'm not saying I don't. Maybe you do like slow, ponderous, heavily armoured tanks, and you don't mind the fact that this is going to get artilleried a lot. But frankly, if you do like your slow, ponderous, heavily armoured tanks, I can think of far better candidates in the game, and far more fun machines to play than this. Anyway, they were my thoughts on the VKB. I hope you guys enjoyed that review, possibly even found it vaguely informative. If you did, then by all means go and check out some of my other videos and or subscribe to my channel, and I wish you very happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao ciao.